Hi, this is Dr. Randy Bach. We are here with the Newton Taxpayers Association, Taxpayer Talk, I guess it is, and we are honored to have as our guest tonight ValeriePontiff, who's running for school committee in Newton, and she and I have had a chance to meet at a gathering recently, and I was very intrigued by her passion, her intelligence, her organization. And I think you're going to have a really wonderful time listening to her as well as to me. So I'd like to welcome Valerie to our show today. And we're going to cover a lot of interesting topics about the Newton schools. Valerie has experience with children in the school, as I have. Both of our kids, pairs of kids, went through the Newton schools at various times. So Valerie, tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to go through the potentially grueling experience of running for office in Newton.
Yeah, well, really, I want to say thank you for having me, and thank you to the Newton Taxpayers Association for bringing forward a lot of issues that everyone in the community cares deeply about, and it's a voice that amplifies, our fiscal responsibility, and we all need to be thinking about that. So we really appreciate you, and thank you for having me.
Sure.
So I'm running for the Newton School Committee. My husband, Jeff, and I have lived in Newton for 20 years. We have 2 children. Our son graduated. He went K through 12, Newton Public Schools. He is now a freshman at Notre Dame. We're very happy.
Congratulations.
We're happy for that. Thank you. And our daughter, who is a special needs student, has mostly attended Newton Public Schools. She did spend 2 years at the Carroll School for Language-Based Learning Disabilities, did go through Ward, Bigelow, and North, although she did during the COVID year, was a 9th grader. She ended up repeating 9th grade at an independent school. We have, by and large, been we have been deep supporters of the public schools. I have been president of the Bigelow PTO for 1 year, and for the Newton North PTSO for 3 years. Those are both elected roles. We are big supporters of the community, and in my professional life, I am a 31-year corporate real estate professional, and I have done significant education real estate transactions in downtown Boston. So I really thank you for having me.
Sure. Well, I have to say that you've impressed me with a number of qualities, some of which I think just came through there. Your kind of fluency with the school system, but also your organizational skills. And you were kind enough to share some PowerPoint slides with me, and you've been talking about some of the fiscal aspects. But before we get to that, I'd kind of like to maybe drill down a little bit about what you said on a personal basis. Your son and daughter both went to public schools and Newton schools, and your daughter most recently has had some issues, I guess, because you mentioned the repetition of the school year. Now, what were your thoughts about how Newton handled the COVID year, and how did it affect you and your family on a personal basis?
Well, look, I think the people that were most impacted are the people who are the least resourced, and that is not just in Newton, that is around the country. But we see states that were open and states that were closed. We were the closed state, one of the closed states. And, I would say the thing inside Newton that was the most troubling, the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education required the City of Newton School Committee and the superintendent to put forward a return to learn plan for fall of 2020 that included full in-person, full remote, and hybrid. We did not submit a full in-person return to learn plan, and no one held anyone accountable for that. Who lost? The students, and who lost? The parents that could not take action. So we had losers, and I think that was really unfortunate, and I think we need to consider accountability as we look forward, and I plan to bring that.
Thank you. And I think that's really, an excellent point. This is all going to be like water under the bridge in a way, and we'll move on with our lives. The water hasn't completely cleared under the bridge yet, because, I'm a medical doctor, and I apologize for my perspective on this, but I can't really believe and understand that kids still are wearing masks indoors. The President of the United States was at a restaurant not wearing a mask. I think people on their own, we've seen this so many times, they take their masks off, they put them on when they're on camera. It's kind of opposite land, upside down land, and kids really don't have the illness pretty much at all, and they would, frankly, in my view, do better to go back to the days of chickenpox parties, rubella parties, when I was a kid, back in the time of the dinosaurs, where they could, build up immunity, and since the vaccine hasn't even been approved for kids, anyway, that's a whole nother topic. But my feeling about kids wearing masks in schools is that it cuts down on a lot of the social interactions for which, frankly, we have schools. I mean, I think kids could probably learn a lot of stuff on their own with, the proper family and the proper situation and whatnot, but we have schools, and part of it was to socialize kids. I'm a product of public schools, at least until 6th grade, so you can check the results. Maybe, your results may vary. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about some of the social aspects of the way the schools are being handled. Because we can talk financial all day. This is the Newton Taxpayers Association, and we care about that. And I would like to, say on a personal basis, I endorse you, and we have your placard lawn sign in front of our house. And so I'm not going to hide my enthusiasm for your candidacy on a fiscal basis and a financial basis, because I think you're really pointing out some good stuff. Hopefully we'll get to that. But just some of on the social issues, because I think those really are what really resonate with families. It's like, okay, money, well, fine. But what I really care about is my kid. And is my kid doing as well as he or she could be doing, and as well as kids used to do in Newton, and so forth? How are we doing? And so maybe you can parse that out. Let's look at the social aspect first.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you brought up masks, and that is something that I was asked in the League of Women Voters debate about masks, and I answered that, and I said, the state mandates them, and even if the state took the mandate off, you would need to be at 80% vaccination to be able to have a mask-free school. So one of my supporters said, oh, Valerie, I don't want to hear you talking about masks because I support masks for kids. And I thought, gosh, this really is a touchstone issue where, I would say we do see social issues with masks. We see language learning issues with masks. We see friendship issues, but yet we also see parents saying, I want to send my children to school, but I want to feel like they are safe. This is part of what makes me feel like they are safe, and therefore I'm comfortable with that. So, as a school committee member, I think you have to appreciate the community feeling there that is not, and maybe err on the conservative side regarding how people feel.
I understand.
Go ahead.
Fair enough. So let's kind of circle back, as the phrase of the day, to some of the things that you're going to be able to bring to the school committee. So let's maybe go back first steps. Why school committee? Why you? Why now? And what can you do? With Paul Levy I had on last month, I was using a cruise ship analogy. It's like, this is kind of a big boat. How can you turn it? And what would you do, and what's your approach?
Well, I think the school committee has 3 buckets, right? Kind of strategic plan, the budget, which are aligned. I mean, obviously those 2 things are very much interconnected, and then also the superintendent. So the superintendent issue is one where I think there is some concern in the community, and the superintendent was renewed in July of 2020 for a 3-year term that started this academic year. I think there is momentum to at least compete that role, and I would support doing that. So in terms of the budget, we have a very significant budget for the Newton Public Schools. In fact, we spend about 53% of our city budget on the schools directly, and another maybe 10 approximate percent out of the city budget, for a total of 63% of our school budget is of our overall city budget is for the schools. So we can call that $2 and $3, and that is a significant amount of money. What I will say is the City Council, I think everyone watching this understands how it works. The City Council does approve the school budget. It is proposed by the administration, evaluated and approved by the school committee, but the real approval is at the City Council level. So what I think we can do is, with metrics and data, really drill down, especially I would say at the administration level, and see if we can do a better job there, not only at the chief executive level, but thinking about, are we doing duplication? I suspect we are. I'd like to look at that.
Fair enough. So we're fortunate to have one of your slides up. You can see it over here.
Oh, thanks.
But they'll probably see it instead of us. Would you like to speak to maybe your slides?
Sure. Thank you. So I put together a little PowerPoint presentation, and I think actually, I don't know if anyone's running the slides, but if we could go to the beginning of it, that would be great. And I'll just talk about the beginning of it because I know what it is. There we go. So this slide is looking at the blue. We have blue and orange. So blue is Newton Public School attendance, and that is the registered number of students in the Newton Public School. So you see, we started to have declines in Newton Public Schools pre-COVID. COVID year is orange, so that would be last fiscal year, 2021. So the blue that follows the orange line is the projections, right? So we projected we would recover, but the orange arrow shows that what's going to be discussed tonight at the school committee meeting is we actually fell further. So when you say to yourself, wow, maybe everyone is just moving out of Newton or not having kids or whatever. Now, people are not having as many kids, but we at the city of Newton are doing a good job at building more housing and getting more families. So over this time period, we had more public school eligible children. Okay, think about that. More public school eligible children and fewer public school attending children. So that tells us, and I'll just give you a last data point there, 82% of public school children used to go to the Newton Public Schools, right at that peak. Now about 75% of public school eligible children go to the Newton Public Schools. So we have to say, as a community, what do we think about that? And I think that is something we should be concerned about. And if you drill down, why am I running? That is really one of the reasons. We need to address that because community cohesion is in part around the public schools, and those need to be very strong and embraced.
Fair enough. So those are interesting things. I mean, it's hard for me to tell exactly what it is. Is it people like, oh my God, they did a bad job with COVID, I'm taking my kid out? Or is it a re-examination of schools in general? I think I can get my kid a better education. Or is it I just have so much money, I'm going to spend it on private school? This is at a time, mind you, that property taxes have gone up higher. As your slides show, it's outpaced income. It's outpaced the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And this is not necessarily the city's fault because the valuations have gone up. So people want houses more than they maybe want other things. And so, especially in the COVID year, which I thought was odd because I thought the prices were going to tank because of general recession and so forth, but apparently prices went up even more than expected because people realized how important the home and the hearth is. And so you figure home, hearth, and schools, because Newton's selling point has always been proximity to in Boston, a reasonable suburb, but also the schools. That was what everyone always talked about. And so what do you think, what's up with that? What's going on?
Well, so to address the money issue, are people just so rich they need to burn their money on private schools? Okay, so I'm going to say no. And the reason why I say no is because Weston, which is full of very rich people, had an increase in public school participation over the same time period.
Oh, really?
Okay, so we can, I think, carve off, we're so rich we need to burn our money. Okay, so that issue I think we should put aside, and then we say, well, what are some other reasons? I think that the academic deliverable at the Newton Public School has changed, and we look at the MCAS scores. We select 13 peer districts, the Newton Public Schools. And of those 13, we have 10th grade MCAS scores for English that are 12th out of 13. Mm-hmm. So then we say, wow, well maybe that's we're serving our economic disadvantaged children very well, so we should see good scores for them. Well, in fact, those are the 13 peer districts, yes, on the screen. But in fact, our economically disadvantaged children have scores at 13 out of 13 or 12 out of 12. They're at the very bottom of the distribution. So we are not serving the typical student well, and we're not serving disadvantaged students well. And I believe that's one of the reasons people are not embracing the public schools as they once were. And we need to change that for the good of our overall community. I plan to do that.
Okay, so let's try to think back. You know, what exactly are these other districts doing better, or conversely, what are we doing worse? You know, my own I have pet theories. You know, one theory is that, you know, things get big, they get bloated. There's a lot of bureaucracy, so big, bloated bureaucracy, and you know, there's kind of a lack of competition. But those could be the other cities as well, or towns and so forth. You know, I worry about a complacency when there's no real competition. I don't have any way of making competition occur within Newton schools. I mean, we are apparently locked out from, you know, making charter schools, and, you know, the competition, such as it is, though, is there. It's private schools. So here, I guess we have the unique ability to have enough money, I guess, to send our kids to private schools, those who want to and can. But there should be something better. So how do we, you know, the word stimulus is used a lot these days, but how do we stimulate the schools to do better? I mean, what is it other places are doing better? How can, you know, and if you do have the right idea, how do we get it instituted?
Well, you know, one of the school committee members, I asked her about the question regarding English language. You know, why are our scores so bad? You know, why are we really not delivering on that? And her feeling was we used a curriculum that other districts didn't use and that wasn't good. Okay, so I think that's an example of something that was, I think, well understood but not changed. So we need to make changes in areas that I think many people understand. I'm not a curriculum expert, but many people are, and understand that we need to make changes to curriculum that get better results. Mm-hmm. And other districts obviously are doing this. I think our peer districts, as I said, use different English curriculum. We need to do that. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sometimes wonder, you know, what the goal is. My kids went through Newton schools completely, and there were times when, I'm not going to get too specific, but there were times in the school when they were doing things that didn't necessarily further their ability to, you know, do well in the MCAS. There were a lot of things happening in the school. There were a lot of social and political ideas that get pushed, and projects and so forth that were not really in keeping with, say, my own history in school from what I experienced. I grew up, you know, I guess my high school stuff was in the 70s, so it was a political time and whatnot. It's not as there was an absence of that. I don't think things are that different. Some people, you know, some people think that we're reliving the 1970s now. But you know, there was still the emphasis on the subject matter. And until you were really good on those, you know, on the STEM stuff, we didn't call it then, you know, science, technological stuff, and mathematics and whatnot, that there's no point doing the extra stuff, you know. And I think there's a lot of, you know, I mean, we see kind of the bringing up of CRT, critical race theory. There's a lot of kind of, you know, political kind of things going on, DIE, diversity, inclusion and equity going on. And kids, I think, are getting, you know, very politically savvy, or maybe politically immune, I don't know which. But sometimes at the loss of academic. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. I mean, I'm sure the schools have hired, you know, DIE coordinators and whatnot, and sometimes I'm not sure whether that is the most helpful thing in creating cohesion amongst the students. I think there's a lot of, you know, differences being made on a personal basis and so forth. But I don't know, how would you like to address that question, if it's a question?
Sure. I mean, I think that's an issue that I get asked. You think about, do people ask that on the campaign trail? They do. They ask about CRT every single day. I mean, it really is something on everyone's mind. And I had an event with a woman who is a curriculum writer for one of the California Unified School Districts, and they were in the process of placing CRT in K through 12 at a grade appropriate curriculum level. Mm-hmm. That was her mandate. She was asked to do that, and that was what she was doing. So, my guess is if you kind of unpack things at the Newton Public Schools level, that is there. It isn't. I mean, it's there either in fact or in practice. So, and I heard Barry Weiss, writes with Substack, former New York Times page editor, interviewed, and she said there's nothing more dangerous than telling white males how privileged they are. And you can kind of flip the narrative upside down a little bit and see that there are some problems with it. So I think unintended consequences are potentially there, and we need to keep our eye out.
Right. I think that, well, back in the 70s when kids, my cohort, wanted to do politics, they went out and did politics. But schools seem to be for the subject matter. And I just think that we have to realize that as having public schools, that it's taxpayers across the board, or citizens, or who are paying the freight for this. And I think there's a little sense of being co-opted. If you buy a ticket to go to Chicago on the airlines, fine, you're supposed to go to Chicago. I mean, it's not really up to the airline to say, we kind of promised you Chicago, but looking at you, I think we think you should go to, I don't know, someplace else. Take you on a trip. You know nothing about, I don't know, Cancun or whatever it happens to be. And so I feel like some of this is being diverted from us. There's things that are happening in the schools that are sort of not really school-ish. They're not really there in the sense of creating the best academic environment. But that's my thoughts. Let's kind of, a thing that intrigued me, what you said earlier, just to kind of change topics a little bit, is your own upbringing. And I was bringing this up with Paul Levy last week, that schools out west, in the western part of our country, Washington, Idaho, and the mountain states and so forth, for Oregon and whatnot, they pay about 40% less per student from what people in the Northeast paying. And these are adjusted dollars according to salaries and all that kind of stuff. So even changing the cost of living and whatnot, they're still paying far less per student, and the test scores are not really showing any difference. Now, you somehow survived schools out west. Do you want to address that at all?
Sure. Well, I think there are a variety of things to sort of address there. So, we used to have, we used to have the Massachusetts was the number 1 or 2 state for schools in the country. So now we're 3, with Florida being number 2. And Florida offers some school choice, and there's also some dollars following the students. And what the researchers believe is that the competition has created better deliverables. We also look at Utah, which spends actually the least per student, the least. And Utah has far from the worst scores. Maybe they're in the upper third of the scores. Mm-hmm. So my particular town, Greeley, Colorado, where I grew up, it is a poor town. Certainly it was when I was growing up, a farming town, a migrant worker town for that matter, with onion farms and slaughterhouses. So I had a public school education. It was certainly nothing to shout about, but I think we can all survive. And certainly many of us are products of private school and public school and turned out just fine. And I think that is certainly true in our country.
Yes, fair enough. So we're going to be closing soon. Your last slide had some interesting points. Maybe you might want to address those about the spending in Newton.
Sure. So, I think one of the things we need to care about fiscally is the decline in enrollment versus the budget as it increases. And that you look at our budget for the schools. This is before the City of Newton portion of the budget. The budget for the schools is over $20,000 per student per year. And then, of course, there's more of that coming from the city. And then you look at the new enrollment numbers announced tonight, because they're down, that we're really looking at 21,000 per student per year. That is over a 10% increase per student per year from the prior year. So you say to yourself, gosh, where is the mandate for this level of spending from the taxpayer generally? And I think that is something we all need to be concerned about. And that is why my real feeling is that we need to get students back to the Newton Public Schools. Having more students is in fact not a threat, it is a good thing. Right. Because we have cohesion in our community, and I really want to see that.
Fair enough. So what I'd like to bring up along those same lines is that, a fair amount of the schools are fixed costs. And, if we have them, and we have the teachers there and so forth, we should use them. We should, but really, for my taste, a lot of the decline in user census is that there's decline in user satisfaction. That people are really voting with their feet. They're showing they're less satisfied with the schools than they should be, and so the schools are not really competing with anybody, necessarily, amongst the public school system, but they're competing in the minds of our citizens. And I think you're bringing a lot of interesting, fresh ideas and fresh perspective. I'm very happy that you came here tonight. I'm going to give you an opportunity to make a closing statement. I think they have another one of your slides up, so maybe you can take care of that.
Sure. So first of all, Randy, I really appreciate you having me. And the last thing I think that's really worth talking about, we have this ARPA money. I think everyone knows the rescue plan money, about $48 million to the city, and people are talking about where to spend it. And after seeing these losses, you say, gosh, in student population, you say, gosh, they shouldn't go to the schools. But one of the issues that we have in the parent community is that we have a lot of new elementary school buildings, and we have a lot of elementary school buildings that have been ignored and are ancient and are sort of on the docket for renewal, but we haven't approved that many yet. So I really think we do need to get those other elementary schools done. I believe the ARPA money is one use for that. And the last thing we need to do is really listen to parents and meet their needs so they send their children to the public school, and I intend to do that.
Thank you. So I think we're going to be ending soon. I did a little homework. It's going to be hard to show. My slides didn't get up. So I've got this tiny one here. But I made a spreadsheet of the FA Day Middle School roster of faculty and staff. And back in my experience at PS 81 in New York City, were teachers, and there was very little in the way of ancillary staff. Right now, looking at the middle school, there are about 40% of the hires are teachers. About 35% are in special needs. There's a certain amount of office and facilities and whatnot, and then there's all these other kind of categories. That's just probably something for another day, another time to talk about, but that's somewhat for my viewers to consider about how we kind of apportion these budgets and what how many people are really necessary to bake this cake. And if the cake is not really as good as the cake used to be, we have to maybe think about the proportions of the types of people we're hiring to do the various bits of the cooking. Sorry, that's a terrible analogy. Anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending the time, ValeriePontiff, and I look forward to seeing all of you next time on Newton Taxpayer TV.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.